Chosen one, there are some things you have been praying to keep, while heaven has been trying to remove them. And that is why your spirit has felt heavy lately. Because part of you keeps trying to hold on to what God has already decided cannot go with you into the next season of your life. You thought the discomfort was confusion, but it is actually separation. God is pulling you away from environments, habits, and people that slowly drained the life out of your spirit. And deep down, you already know it. There are conversations that leave you empty now, places that no longer feel right, connections that once comforted you, but now only exhaust you. You keep asking yourself, why do I suddenly feel disconnected from everything? Because your spirit is changing. And once God begins transforming a person internally, they can no longer feel comfortable inside places that were built for an older version of themselves. Nay, listen carefully. Not every closed door is an attack. Some doors close because God heard conversations you did not. Some endings happen because heaven is protecting you from futures you cannot yet see. You called it rejection, but heaven called it rescue. Chosen one, there are people who only knew the broken version of you, the version that accepted less, the version that stayed silent to keep peace, the version that ignored red flags because you were afraid of being alone. But God is breaking that mindset now. You are entering a season where discernment matters more than attachment, and that is why your eyes are opening. Suddenly you notice things you ignored before. You feel energies differently. You recognize manipulation faster. You stop forcing conversations. You stop begging for bare minimum effort. That is not arrogance. That is growth. The old version of you tolerated what the new version refuses to entertain. And yes, transformation can feel lonely at first. Because when God begins elevating your spirit, certain people naturally become uncomfortable around you. Not because you attacked them, not because you changed into someone evil, but because your spirit no longer matches environments built on confusion, negativity, fake loyalty, or hidden disrespect. Light exposes what darkness wanted hidden. That is why some people disappeared once you started healing. Chosen one, hear this carefully. Some relationships survive because both people stay spiritually asleep. But once one person begins awakening, everything hidden rises to the surface. The manipulation becomes obvious. The dishonesty becomes visible. The emotional distance becomes impossible to ignore. And suddenly, you realize you are fighting to save connections that were quietly destroying your peace. God saw what you could not see before. That is why things started shifting. That is why certain people became distant. That is why communication changed. That is why confusion entered places that once felt stable, because heaven was exposing what no longer belonged in your life. And even though part of you still misses certain people, your spirit knows you cannot go backward anymore. You have already outgrown the old environment. Chosen one, stop mourning everything God removed. Some things ended because they completed their assignment in your life. Not every person is meant to walk with you forever. Some people were only meant to teach you lessons. Some were meant to reveal your wounds. Some were meant to prepare you for discernment. But not everyone is meant to enter your next chapter. And the longer you try to drag expired connections into a new season, the heavier your spirit becomes. God is not punishing you by removing things. He is making room for peace, making room for clarity, making room for people who truly align with your purpose instead of your loneliness. Because there is a difference. Some people connect with your pain, others connect with your destiny. And heaven is teaching you how to recognize the difference now. Chosen one, you are not losing yourself. You are shedding versions of yourself that were built out of survival. The people-pleasing version, the emotionally exhausted version, the version that stayed where it was not valued, the version that kept shrinking to make others comfortable. God is calling that version of you out of hiding. And yes, the process feels uncomfortable, because healing always exposes what distraction used to hide. But this separation happening in your life is not random. It is spiritual preparation. And one day, you will look back and realize that the things you begged God to keep were the exact things blocking your peace. This is your confirmation. You are not being abandoned. You are being repositioned. Chosen one. The hardest part of your journey was never the pain. It was the isolation, the feeling that nobody truly understood what was happening inside you. You smiled around people while silently fighting battles they could never see. You answered, "I'm fine," while your spirit felt exhausted. You kept showing up for others while secretly wondering who would ever show up for you. And there were nights when the silence became so loud, you started questioning yourself. Why do I feel so disconnected? Why does nobody understand me anymore? Why does it feel like I'm changing while everything around me stays the same? Listen carefully, chosen one. The isolation was not punishment, it was preparation. Because there are things God can only build inside you when the noise finally disappears. Some lessons cannot grow in crowded rooms. Some revelations only arrive in silence. Some spiritual transformations require separation. That is why God allowed certain people to walk away. Not because you are unworthy, not because you failed, but because heaven knew you could not hear God clearly while constantly surrounded by distraction, opinions, emotional chaos, and relationships that kept pulling you backward. Sometimes God removes voices so you can finally recognize His. And deep down, your spirit already knew this season was different. That is why you stopped forcing connections. That is why meaningless conversations started feeling exhausting. That is why you suddenly craved peace more than attention. Your soul was changing. Chosen one, isolation reveals things that comfort used to hide. When the distractions disappeared, you finally saw your wounds clearly. The fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough. And for the first time in your life, you could no longer escape yourself. That was the real battle, because God was not only changing your environment, He was healing your identity. You spent years becoming who people needed you to be. Strong for everyone, available for everyone, understanding toward everyone. But secretly, you were tired. Tired of carrying emotional weight that was never yours. Tired of pretending certain things did not hurt. Tired of pouring into people who only remembered you when they needed something. And heaven saw every second of it. God saw the nights you sat alone, trying to understand why your heart felt so heavy. He saw the moments you wanted to give up emotionally. He saw the silent disappointments you never spoke about. And instead of abandoning you, He pulled you aside. Chosen one, hear this carefully. Sometimes God isolates people before elevating them. Jesus spent time alone before ministry. Moses spent years in the wilderness before leadership. Joseph was separated before promotion. David was hidden before the crown. And now heaven has been doing the same with you. Not to destroy your life, to rebuild it correctly. Because the version of you entering the next season cannot think the same way, tolerate the same things, or depend on the same unhealthy patterns. Isolation exposes what still controls you. It reveals who you are without constant validation, without attention, without approval. And yes, at times it felt lonely. But loneliness and separation are not the same thing. Loneliness says, nobody wants me. Separation says, God is preparing me. There is a difference. Chosen one, you have been in a season where heaven was detoxing your spirit. Detoxing you from fake loyalty. Detoxing you from emotional dependence. Detoxing you from constantly seeking your worth through people who could never define your value. That is why some relationships suddenly collapsed. Not every connection ended because you were wrong. Some ended because your spirit outgrew them. And once God begins raising your standards spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, certain environments can no longer hold you. You started noticing disrespect faster. You stopped tolerating manipulation. You stopped chasing people who gave you inconsistent energy. That is growth. The old version of you begged to stay connected. The healed version chooses peace instead. Chosen one, God has been teaching you how to stand emotionally without depending on temporary people to hold your identity together. Because your future requires emotional stability. Your calling requires discernment, and discernment grows in quiet places. That is why this season felt so uncomfortable. Heaven was rebuilding you from the inside out, and now something inside you is changing permanently. You no longer crave chaos. You no longer romanticize toxic connections. You no longer want relationships built on confusion and inconsistency. Your spirit wants truth now, peace now,